So this is a really rare moment. And I want to encourage all national reformers who care about open primaries to weigh in and lean into this, because this is not a moment that's going to happen structurally in New York City anytime soon. Now's the time.
Let's orient everybody to what's happening in New York City. So you've got a charter commission appointed by Mayor Adams. Their job as a commission is to make recommendations, place them on the ballot, and then the voters either vote yay or nay. And in the middle of this process, lo and behold, the issue of open primaries becomes part of the dialogue. This commission, I'll be completely honest, surprised the hell out of me with how much they were willing to listen to what's actually going on in New York.
And the devastation that I felt, knowing that my voice wasn't going to be heard in that election.
Independent voters should have rights.
Hell yeah.
They should have their rights. Let them vote.
I am against anything that would prevent anyone in the U.S. from voting.
Focus. We are one of the most explosive and expressive cities. Please step up.
If you can't make it here, you can make it anywhere because of, I think, the resonance of New York. And this is the moment for us to pursue this. It is a perfect storm.
Thank you, everybody, for joining us. I'm really excited about today's conversation with John Avlon. Full disclosure, I love talking politics with John Avlon. He's one of the few people I know who is absolutely an intellectual. He's written books about Lincoln, about Washington. He can go into a salon at the Yale Club and hold court. And he knows what's going on in the streets. He knows New York politics better than anybody. And I'm really looking forward to spending some time talking about what's happening in New York City, New York State. For those of you who don't know John, he's been a fixture in the media for the last quarter of a century. He's been at CNN, at the Bulwark. He hosts podcasts. He's been a political director at CNN. He ran for Congress last year in New York's 1st District. Welcome, John. Great to have you here. Thanks for taking some time.
Thanks, man. Good talking with you. I would never, ever, ever describe myself as an intellectual, but I appreciate the spirit.
Well, you do a good imitation of an intellectual.
I write books on the side because, everyone needs a hobby. Thank you.
Right. I have some questions about New York, but this audience is from all over the country. I want to kind of create a little bit of a New York vibe, and I want to show a recent video clip from New York One, plus a man in the street, women in the street video that we did. So Russ, let's cue 2 minutes of video, and then we'll start the conversation.
The City Commission also has recommended overhauling the city's primary election process, considering creating an open primary system where the two top candidates would face off in a general election.
Looked at ways that we can both have elections be more cost effective, but also looked at ways that we can make sure that more and more people can be part of the political process.
So what this would do actually is make sure that independent voters, non-affiliated voters, we're the only group of voters growing in the city, not Democrats, not Republicans, but independents. It would give them a voice in the primaries when effectively many elections are decided.
Avlon, the head of the Citizens Union, a good government group, supports the changes. A new report from the city's campaign finance board found that 21% of the city's voters are now registered unaffiliated. The commission is also weighing whether to change local elections to even number years to coincide with state and federal elections, which has historically been times of higher voter turnout.
We know this. Representative elections have representative results. That's good for democracy.
Kelly Mena, New York One.
It's 20% of all registered voters in New York City are not allowed to vote in primaries.
No, that's really, really ridiculous. Things have to change.
1 million New York City voters are independents. 50% of New York City independents are young people. New York City bans independents from voting in primaries where most races are decided.
I think the independent voters should have rights.
Hell yeah.
They should have their rights. Let them vote.
I think that's BS.
I say it's not fair.
Ridiculous. That's crazy. That's scary.
I am against anything that would prevent anyone in the U.S. from voting.
So you're just missing a lot of people. You're not getting the public's opinion.
Everybody should have the right to vote.
Everyone have the right to vote because everybody have a right to vote.
Exactly, yeah.
And if you're sharing this out to every New Yorkers, we are one of the most explosive and expressive cities. Please step up, express yourself, let it be known how you feel about this.
Thanks,
like it.
Russ. So, John, let's orient everybody to what's happening in New York City. So, you've got a charter commission appointed by Mayor Adams to look at issues of housing and procurement reform. Their job as a commission is to make recommendations, place them on the ballot, and then the voters either vote yay or nay. And in the middle of this process, lo and behold, to everybody's surprise, the issue of open primaries becomes part of the dialogue and part of their initial report. What am I missing here? Any other aspects of this that you think are important?
Well, sure. First of all, New York is an outlier when it comes to most American cities. I mean, I think, 82% of America's large cities, I think up to 42 out of 50, have some form of open primary or nonpartisan election.
Right.
So New York is an outlier in that we have closed partisan primaries. And most elections are decided in the Democratic primary. The city is sort of 6-1 Democrat to Republican. But as that video showed, there's 1 million folks who are independents, who are in the somewhat condescending language of the New York Board of Elections, blanks.
Right.
That's a whole another issue. I have been writing about this issue for a long time, beginning as a columnist working in City Hall in my 20s, and then a columnist in the New York Sun when Mike Bloomberg put open primaries up for a ballot initiative through the Charter Revision Commission. But it was set up in a year that had very low turnout, which was sort of setting it up to fail. And as I've written about extremism in my journalism and focusing on independent voters, but looking at really the rise of extremism, I wrote a book called Wingnuts 15 years ago about the rise of the far right in reaction to Barack Obama, but also the sort of the feedback loop between the far right and the far left. Open primaries are obviously a way to cure this. I mean, this is why, to me, the prescription is redistricting reform, open primaries, ranked choice voting. There is no silver bullet in American political life, but if you change the incentives structure, you would get a saner, more constructive politics. The incentive structure is totally screwed up, particularly in Congress. And so so all of a sudden, if you change the incentives, you're going to get better behavior, you're going to get better, more constructive behavior. So this is within our power. And in New York, we don't have a ballot initiative the way that many other states do, but we do have these charter revision commissions that mayors tend to try to put up, most years, to make changes to the city charter, which is in effect the local constitution in New York City. This does not affect New York State. Citizens Union, where I'm chairman of Citizens Union, is the state's oldest good government organization. Its purview is larger than the city of New York, but has been sort of fighting for reform and election reforms since 1897. So
Right.
been in it. We are all in to try to get this charter revision commission, which was formed by Mayor Adams to look at housing, which certainly needs reforms or incentives put in place, to follow through on their surprising but incredibly gratifying and courageous proposal that they look at open primaries with the top 2 or top 4. I've given testimony on this issue. There is broader support than we have seen in the past, largely because people realize that, if you've got a growing number, I mean, the number of independents are growing in New York City and state, while Democrats are declining and Republicans are flatlined. And again, Republicans are only like 10% of the electorate. For a long time in New York City's history, you'd have a Republican mayor every 25 years. But they were sort of liberal Republicans. They were reform
Right.
Republicans. And I think the rise of Trump has made that less and less likely, that cycle to repeat. So it really is a huge opportunity. There will be entrenched interests to try to block it. There will be some fellow good government folks who are afraid that the relatively recent ranked choice voting reforms that we put in place, which are only in place in the Democratic primary, this would be disruptive to them. I would just really counsel that this is a unique moment. It is a unique moment because the Charter Revision Commission has a high degree of independence. Because we may have 4 or 5 people in the general election because the Working Families Party might run their own candidate. and Eric Adams, the incumbent mayor, who had been indicted for corruption charges and then sort of was accused of a corrupt bargain with the Trump administration and has subsequently been dismissed. He's going to run as an independent, apparently.
And Walden as well, just got enough signatures.
And Jim Walden, who's an independent, who's a great guy, and actually formerly served on the Citizens Union board. So that raises the specter of a mayor who doesn't have 50% support. That's bad as well. So this is the moment for us to pursue this. It is a perfect storm. But if you can make it here, you can make it anywhere because of, I think, the resonance of New York and the residents of New York City. So this is a really rare moment. And I want to encourage all national reformers who care about open primaries to weigh in and lean into this, because this is not a moment that's going to happen structurally in New York City anytime soon. Now's the time.
How do you, John, because we've both been around the block in New York City politics. We've seen charter commissions that are the fix is in, meaning before the first public hearing, they've already decided what they're going to do and what they're not going to do. Right. This commission, I'll be completely honest, surprised the hell out of me with how much they were willing to listen to what's actually going on in New York. What's your sense been of this specific commission?
I think Adams' troubles, shall we say, the specter of a lot of corruptions, indictments, resignations around his administration, the way that the Trump administration sort of made them go away, and there was credible reporting and resignations among prosecutors for a sort of offering of a quid pro quo, that liberated the Charter Revision Commission, which was always independent, but allowed them to be even more independent. Moreover, I think that it means that people in and around the administration are thinking about their legacy and have a willingness to go big. And I think there's also an awareness that, I wrote an op-ed for the Daily News the other day, and I dug into a couple of really good reports, one by New York City Campaign Finance Board, NYC Votes. But I did some math myself, which I'd done in a column in the New York Post a million years ago. When Bill de Blasio wins the mayoral primary in, I guess it's 2013, he gets the support of 7% of registered voters. 7%.
Right.
Even though he had an excellent competitor in the general election, it was after 20 years of Rudy and Bloomberg, the city was going to revert to sort of Democratic mayors. The election was effectively over.
Yep.
Eric Adams, 8 years later, and so de Blasio was in office for 8 years, despite being broadly unpopular for most of that time. Then Eric Adams comes in, and he gets the support of the equivalent of 9% of all registered voters. Ranked choice voting is a really good innovation, but it's incomplete unless it applies to the whole field.
Right. Because all it is in New York is in this closed partisan primary.
Correct.
Right.
And so it's just not sufficient. Whereas if you had imagined all candidates starting out trying to appeal to not just play to their respective base, which empowers special interests and often opens the door to sort of corrupt bargains, but is appealing to the broadest possible audience, which actually looks more like what the actual job of mayor is, right? Which is actually, it's a non-ideological problem-solving job. One of my favorite quotes is Fiorello LaGuardia saying there's no Republican or Democratic way to sweep the streets.
Right.
And so this is just, again, New York's the outlier here. And there are going to be people who try to scuttle this, but we've got a narrow window to get this through. And I really do think you change the rules, you change the game. And we've seen, obviously, it decreases polarization. It doesn't empower extremes. It is something that New York has a rare opportunity to do right now. And so everyone should lean in right now. This is the window. There's, I think, 4 more weeks where the Charter Revision Commission is taking in public feedback and testimony. And you can be sure the special interests are going to deploy all those people to try to intimidate them and have them back away from doing what they, I think, know is the right thing. I don't think they'll be swayed, but this is the time. And I know the reform community had a disappointing last cycle. The country did, from my perspective. I can relate. But this is really important right now. And New York needs to lead again.
We remember 2003, where every politician, labor union, interest group came out against us. It was a bloodbath. what's your sense of what's changed? Are there?
Yeah, it's a great question, and I just interrupted you, and I apologize.
No, that's the question.
So here's what I think when you're dealing with some form of ballot initiative, which a Charter Revision Commission proposal to the voters effectively is, albeit in a non-traditional way. The cycle is the thing that matters most. The cycle is the thing, the election cycle. So representative elections have representative results, as I said. So if you have a presidential cycle, you're going to see, north of 50%, 60% participation of voters, including independents, by the way.
Right.
If you do it in a gubernatorial cycle, it'll be around 20 points less, but still, it'll be a representative sample. In New York, one of the things we were also proposing in Citizens Union is to have even year elections because it doubles or triples turnout. But mayoral races are in odd years, 25 this year. This year, we got a primary coming up in a month. You're going to have better turnout. In the fourth year of that cycle, the off year, you only have a couple of city council races. So it really is disproportionately dominated by the most partisan Democrats, people who were involved in the apparatus, and unions and stuff like that. Now, look, I think unions recognize that more and more of their members are registered independent, and I think their attitude is changing. Also, more and more of their members voted for Donald Trump. So the idea that unions can sort of, play a Democratic primary the way they did, maybe thought they could do 50, 60 years ago is just, I think they recognize the math doesn't math the way it did. But so the biggest thing is getting it in a more representative cycle, which is incidentally also what Arnold Schwarzenegger found when he was governor of California. So the biggest thing in 2003, from my perspective, wasn't only that maybe it wasn't as apparent to everybody, the trend in independent voters that have been going on, which really takes a sharp.
It's accelerated a lot.
It's accelerated a lot.
Accelerated since
accelerating in 2003, by the way. It's been a decade since Ross Perot's independent run.
Right.
Really sort of unlocks a lot of it. But as the parties have gotten more polarized, more and more people have registered independents. That is not a coincidence to me, even though there's a small cottage industry of academics who try to convince people that the uptick in independent voter resistance doesn't mean anything. It does, but that they're really, people are part of captive to the partisan economy in more ways than they like to admit. Yeah. And so I think the number one difference is more and more people have registered independents. The parties have gotten more and more polarized. We have two recent examples of elections that are decided by incredibly small numbers of registered voters because the normal, check and balance of there being a viable center right doesn't exist in New York City, certainly. And I would argue in state and nation because Trump has hijacked the party to such an extreme extent. And so I think it's a different environment, but it's also a different election cycle. And it really is, it's a question of the cycle.
Got it. Let me broaden the lens here for a minute and get your take on some national trends. So here's 4 things that have happened in the last 6 weeks. The Democratic-controlled assembly in Nevada, the Speaker of the Assembly introduced a bill for open primaries. The chairwoman of the Florida Democratic Party, Nikki Fried, said, hey, maybe we should open our primaries to independents. The New Mexico Democratic Party passed open primaries into law, and the Democratic governor signed it. And now you have New York, a bastion of Democratic politics, where there's this openness to this. So you ran as a Democrat for Congress. You kind of have one foot in independent politics, one foot in Democratic politics. Is the Democratic Party having a conversation among itself around recalibrating its relationship to independent voters? Is that
it? I believe it is. It is starting to, and it desperately needs to. I mean, it does.
How do you see that?
Well, it just doesn't. Again, it doesn't take a genius to figure out that the math requires winning parties to build coalitions that involve appealing to and realigning independent voters.
Right.
Now, and that's particularly urgent in places where Democrats have been losing ground. And again, regionally, New York and New Jersey saw the biggest shift towards Trump. Now, we can talk about why that is. That doesn't mean Donald Trump won New York or New Jersey. He did. But I think Democrats are realizing that opening their primaries to independents will offer ballast and balance and better prepare them for a general election. And I think that's healthy and really important. At Arizona State University, I see Kathy Stewart on the line. We've got a Jackie Salet and some of her colleagues run the Independent Voter Analysis Institute, a name I'm butchering right now, but they did a very interesting report after the election that I encourage everyone to read. And look, if I was as a journalist for the past 20 years, I've been an independent. I was a Democrat before that, worked for a Republican mayor who was pro-choice, pro-gay rights, pro-immigrant, vestiges of things that no longer exist for the most part in the Republican Party, pro-healthcare. But ran for Congress as a Democrat, first of all, because I felt a real moral urgency around the election, and I didn't want to just talk about it on TV, wanted to actually do something about it. And because in federal races, I really do believe, the way the office works, you should join a party. And to me, we need to form the broadest possible coalition to stop the return of Donald Trump, which was not successful. It was interesting to me because everything I know about independents, having studied them for a long time, if you had told me that one candidate was talking about shooting his political opponents in the face in the closing argument of the election, promising more polarization and extremism, and the other was campaigning with a prominent member of the opposition party, I'd say, well, that person's more likely to win the independent voters, because so much of what drives the rise of independence is disgust and frustration with polarization and hyperpartisanship. For a variety of reasons, which we can get into, that did not happen this cycle. Late-breaking independents and undecideds went towards Donald Trump and the Republicans, and a lot of Democrats stayed home. That's partly about the middle-class squeeze, which I think is one of the biggest drivers of frustrations in our politics for decades, which was compounded by the affordability crisis being compounded by inflation. Because Democrats did not mind the store when it came to the border, perceptions of civic decline, public safety. Those are all major factors for sure. So Democrats really need to get right with independent voters, and they need to do the work to figure out how to reconnect and to figure out where that breach has occurred. And I think it's enormously healthy that you see these state leaders opening up their primaries. Now, I will say it is only a step in the right direction, but a really important step.
Yeah, it can't be the end all be all of policy.
It can't. And I want to caution everybody to one other thing too. We see a lot of blue states and bluish tinged purple states being the ones that are advancing election reforms, where Republican states are moving decidedly in the opposite direction, right? With opposing redistricting reform, trying to close partisan primaries. That's a larger problem, right? I mean, if the blue states are open to Republican governors, but the red states have made it so that they're decreasing their Democratic representation even far below registration or identification numbers, that's another structural danger in our country. I'll take it for the time being, but if Texas is remorselessly redistricting to keep power while people are while passing tax bills that force people to red states, blue states should take a note and figure out why red state economies are more attractive to many people. People aren't moving to Texas because of 6 weeks abortion bans, I'll tell you that. But if we in blue states and purple states end up being the ones advancing election reforms, that's a structural imbalance.
Yeah, I agree. And I think that it's messy. I mean, right now, some of our biggest opportunities are in red states, Oklahoma, Nebraska. There is a relationship, in my opinion, between the open primaries issue and the kind of the populist anti kind of smarty pants mood in the country. And if you look at Florida, for example,
is that what we're calling it? Okay,
I guess. I mean, that's a good way to put it. I mean, I'm not saying it's all good,
but yeah, it's about more than that. I mean, it's
it's a lot, and it's messy. And I would just add to your list of things the Democrats got wrong in 2024. I think the decision to shield Biden from a competitive primary was absolutely a killer. I think that independents in particular reacted to that.
Clearly his decision to run, and I wrote a column about this in December of 23, maybe earlier. I think it was actually much earlier. And I hadn't made the decision to leave CNN to run for Congress, but I sort of said, I think it was probably December of 22 after the midterms. And I said, he's got a tough decision because I understand. I think he's been a consequential and effective president. You look at legislatively and other things, but he said he'd be a transitional figure. Time moves in one direction. I understand not wanting to give up the advantages of incumbency, but I do think that Biden staying in plus inflation, 7-day campaign from Kamala Harris, all those things, algorithm shifts that absolutely were weighted in favor of the Trump campaign on X and TikTok, which established some of the background noise of the campaign. All these things are contributing factors. But if Democrats can really, they got to get right with independents to get back in the ring.
That's well put.
Yeah.
Let me ask you one more question, and then I want to open it up.
Sure.
We've got some questions. Something I've been thinking about and working on, obviously open primaries. We want open primaries. But one of the things that we have to be honest about is that even where we've enacted open primaries, turnout in primaries remains very low. And something that I've been thinking about and talking about with people like Chloe Akers in Tennessee is, in addition to the laws, which are not good, there is a cultural bias that most Americans have, which goes something like this. It's activists who vote in primaries. I'm a regular person. I vote in November, even though all the decisions have already been made. We've all been educated to think that the real election is November. The primary is where kind of like really dedicated partisans come out. How do we change that culture? Have you thought about this? Like, how do you get Americans to think, hey, voting in the primary is really important?
Well, look, yes. First of all, I think civic education needs to be more broadly embraced, not only from a history standpoint, which is important as a sometime historian, but teaching people about the responsibilities of citizenship. Now, I do think if you have open primaries with ranked choice voting, and you really publicize the primaries, and it has to be a civic education standpoint, you will encourage people to get more involved. Also, making it easier to vote helps. That lowering barriers to entry, the states that have done mail-in voting, particularly progressive reforms in the West and Northwest, have a very high return rate. Reduce the hassle factor while making sure that things are verifiable and secure. I do think that, but it needs to be a civic education standpoint, and it needs to be easy, right? I mean, there's the group Why Tuesday, which says maybe voting should be over a weekend. I mean, these things are all within our control. And I think we do need sort of a new reform era where we are saying, and I've written this extensively, and I believe this deeply, we need to think of our generation's responsibility right now as to learn from the self-inflicted wound of the Trump administration, Trump's reelection in particular, which from any geopolitical or historical standpoint is a self-inflicted wound, right? We just reelected someone who tried to overturn our democracy, an election. That's in no way good. You could spin yourself all day long, but it ain't. So we need to think about what steps are we going to take comprehensively to strengthen American democracy for the 21st century. We need to usher in a new era of reform to do it. And I think really thinking holistically, how can we increase turnout? Okay, maybe the elections aren't on Tuesdays, again, within our power. Maybe we should make sure there's multiple factors to vote, making sure there's easy access to accurate information, making people realize that the real vote is off to the primaries, and creating a degree of predictability about when that is. Chicago has open primaries, but the elections are in February.
Right. Right.
I always said, well, that seems incomplete. Unless you live in Chicago, but correct me if I'm wrong. February is not a great time to stand in line.
No.
And so we really do need to think more holistically about this. There's no silver bullet, but I'll just underline this before we get to questions. I still believe human beings are basically rational creatures, and they respond to incentive structures, right? Create incentives, you change behavior. Members of Congress and politicians are, unfortunately, as we have seen, almost unilaterally focused on getting reelected. And as long as they're afraid, much more afraid, that they can't cross the base in any way, shape, and form because they're statistically vastly likely to lose a closed partisan primary than a competitive general election, their incentives for actually doing their job as constitutionally described, reaching across the aisle, solving problems, reasoning together, that gets screwed, fundamentally screwed up. It puts hyper-partisanship and polarization on overdrive. So open primaries are not the only thing that needs to be done, but I would argue they're one of the most important thing, arguably the most important thing that can be done. But it's not a destination; it's an essential step.
It's a step. I totally agree.
But essential.
Yeah, I mean, we've fought against silver bulletism here at open primaries for the last 15 years because it's an important step. All right, I want to open it up. A reminder: if you have a question, just type in the chat your name, what state you're from, and a one sentence condensed version of what you want to ask, and then I'll call on you. We're going to start with Andrew Cottingham in Illinois, who has a. Go ahead, just ask your question, Andrew.
So yes, I'm from Illinois, and we have open primaries
Wait, we
here
just
in
have a
Illinois.
timeout for your jacket tie combo for a second.
Yeah,
that's awesome.
That's a beauty.
Are you a
Oh,
Knicks
thank
fan?
you.
Are you a Knicks fan? Because I'd like to think you are, but I doubt you are because you're wearing Knicks colors. We had a tough last night. I'm feeling. Okay.
So yeah, so I'm from Illinois. No worries. Yes, I'm from Illinois, and I'm familiar with our open primary system that we have here. However, Illinois and New York have very similar situations going on. You've got a strictly more partisan ran state. You've got, we've got Chicago that basically runs the state of Illinois outside of our capital. You guys have New York City. And we do have open primaries mainly because we don't have voter registration, party registration in the state of Illinois. And so, however, we also have, like New York, some of the worst election integrity in the country. So even if we have better representation for independents, our votes are also undermined by election integrity or lack thereof. And also the fact that we also have extremely restrictive ballot access requirements. So getting independent and third-party candidates on the ballot is very restricted in our state. And I know it's like that in New York as well. So my question is, after succeeding in accomplishing getting open primaries in states, I assume the next step would be getting access to the ballot line and ensuring that we have election integrity in our states as well. So I'm just curious if are the next steps that you guys were talking about.
Well, so I think it should be delineated, but I want to be careful about prioritizing them because, but you're right. First of all, election integrity is a baseline. People need to have faith in the results of their elections. You live in Illinois, so I'm not going to lecture you on Illinois specifics. However, I would say that making sure that people have faith and confidence in election results outside the outright disinformation that's being splayed. Remember, one of the really dangerous things is, as a backstop to actually losing, Trump spun, even in 2016, the idea that the election would be stolen. That's a way just to decrease faith in democracy. So as long as we're having a reality-based conversation, I do think there can be more transparency, and there should be. New York has fusion voting, so we there are different people can run on different ballot lines. I think that's actually pretty healthy. You can create new coalitions. I think it should be easier to get on the ballot. I will say Illinois, and I forget what year this happened, but I had proportional representation for a time. Now, I think that's interesting, right? I mean, that's a way to make sure you've got more representative results. I do think people's sort of frustration with the two parties, I understand it. I also think that in this particular circumstance, now's not the time to fragment. Now's the time to build the broadest possible coalitions and easy on the purity tests. Let's focus on saving our democracy, right? But I think there are a lot of reforms that could be put in place to increase transparency. When you have a state with a very populous city that ends up producing much of the tax revenue, that's a tricky thing to rebalance. But I actually think that, as long as states are investing, a lot of these smaller towns and cities could have very good futures because of higher quality of life and lower cost of living. So I do think, we've been sort of out of the building mode for too long. Each state's going to have its own unique challenges. But so I'm not going to offer that prescription, but I do think the fact that Illinois had proportional representation for a time is a reminder that a lot of the rules we live with today are not inevitable. They're not handed down from God. They're the result of people deliberating in a democracy, and we should remember that and take the reins back.
Thanks, Andrew. Let's go to John Buscemi in Florida. A question about Republicans and independents. Go ahead, John.
Mute. Okay, I just wanted to find out what incentive or carrot can we provide Republicans or the Republican Party so that they would have a similar background like the Democrats to open up the primaries in Florida?
Well, I think right now, again, I want to be careful about offering like really deep prescriptions on any given state, but obviously one of the things Florida has done, I see you there, hello, is really embraced the rigged system of redistricting to empower Republicans disproportionately, even as the Democratic Party has sort of flailed the last 2 decades. I think right now Republicans feel like they don't need any help. They got everything.
Yep.
They've rigged the system just fine to have perpetual power. I think where Republicans have often built bridges to independence is by inflaming associations of the Democratic Party with the far left on issues of cultural grievance or cultural irritants that really do alienate a lot of people. I think that the far left does have an alienating effect for a lot of folks. I would just remind them that in most elections, state and federal, you're not actually, the impact is, you're not actually voting on cultural issues, right? You're voting on budgets, you're voting on, on foreign policy, you're voting on what kind of country we are and what kind of country we're being. But very often, I think Republicans have created a coalition with independents based on anger at perceptions of the far left, and so right now they feel like they can just play to the base all day long and do fine. I mean, they basically purged definitionally the center right out of the state. I mean, look what's happened to Jeb Bush, like what's happened to John McCain, for God's sakes, one of the great Americans, has been basically excommunicated from the party, which he was the nominee not that long ago, demonized. I find it disgusting.
Just to add to that, John, I think that one of the reasons the Democratic Party of Florida is looking to open their primary, and by the way, they haven't done it yet. They might not even do it.
But the intention is itself something.
Yes, the intention is revealing. Given that 4 years ago they led the campaign to prevent open primaries from coming to Florida, they literally ran the campaign opposing us. But I think one of the reasons that this would be a good step is that once independent voters get the sense of, oh, I get to vote in the Democratic primary, but I can't vote in the Republican primary, and I want to vote in the Republican primary, we hope to harness that to create some pressure on the Republicans. Now, is that a short-term fix? No. As John points out, the Republicans have all the cards in Florida right now. I mean, they're running the table. The Democrats are literally almost like Green Party status. But I think that as independents flex our muscle, get involved, make our voices heard, we're going to have some leverage with the Republicans, knock wood. All right, I want to go to Kentucky, and then I want to go to New York. I have 2 people from Kentucky who have questions, Mark Ritter and, hold on, and Rich Stevenson. Why don't you both ask your question, and then John answer, and then we're going to go to New York. So Rich and go ahead. Rich and Mark.
Okay, what I guess I don't remember my question, but it's what John met you at some of the Reform Party conventions and all that kind of thing. But I'm wondering if we don't need a 50-state solution with a common goal, and I'm talking about Final Five, voting, RCV, and open and voting by mail? Do we need a populist movement? And
so yeah, so I think that national movements are necessary and healthy, and I do think they should have common prescriptions, but the changes will happen on the state level, right?
Yeah.
So at the end of the day, there needs to be a focus on localities. I do think when I say we need to sort of build a broader movement to strengthen American democracy in the 21st century, to think of ourselves as a fourth founding generation, that does necessarily mean building a national movement to strengthen what I see as the vital center, but in a very inclusive way.
Yes.
I do think I do think there are scenarios where in the Senate you could see the fulcrum strategy happen if things further deteriorate, if people in the senators in the center feel like they've got ballast, they've got backing, and a popular national movement can do that. I would be happy. I've never personally seen the magic of Final Five. I know some people feel very strongly about it. Personally, in New York, I'm fine with top two. As I explained to the commission, while our citizens' union official position is top two, you could also have a general election with top three or top four, as long as there's ranked choice voting. The point is you need to have a majority mayor. And
Alaska has top four.
Yeah, and I think that's fine. And it's always healthy to, and I think Alaska, you could see the positive impact already in our politics. Okay.
All right, let's go to Mark Ritter.
Well, thank you. I wanted to know, you started off and you said Charter Revision Committee, and that was what was spearheading this effort. In Kentucky, we're very supermajority red Republican. We don't have a referendum option. So and you didn't have a referendum option. So what is a charter commission? How were they able to work this process to get something on the ballot possibly?
Sure. Mark, I'm happy to explain it to you. But again, I think your question illustrates that every state's going to have, the beauty of federalism, he says somewhat ironically, but not entirely. Every state's going to have different mechanisms. So New York doesn't have a direct ballot initiative, except a very, very cumbersome one that's almost never used. We do in the city have and I live in Sag Harbor, but have an apartment in the city. So we've got a ballot initiative measure that doesn't work, but we have a charter revision commission. The mayor puts up charter revision commissions. They're independent, but appointed by the mayor. So you do the math. In this case, because of the mayor's sort of troubles, and because primarily of a lot of public support for open primaries, this charter revision commission decided they'd be open to it, even though it wasn't part of their original mandate. So effectively, they were persuaded by the public, as well as, I think, liberated by circumstance. But that is going to be highly specific. It is why those voices who are counseling delay in New York genuinely don't know what they're talking about with regard to the specific politics. You are not going to get this environment again.
Yeah.
Or at least to on it would be incredibly foolish so as to be squandering the opportunity. And I will go hard at that if people want to undercut this because they think they can make the perfect maybe good. No way. Not now.
I want to go to Michael Maria, who has a question about, are there any opportunities in New York State? Go ahead, Michael.
Sure. Hello. I'm in Westchester County, outside of New York City, obviously. And my specific question was, do you think there are any credible efforts to open primaries or get ranked choice voting in New York State? My experience has been that the Democrats, who are in control, are very much against it. The Republicans are very much against it, like Mike Lawler and all this come out repeatedly against it. And I was just wondering, do you think that there might be some sort of effect of New York City adopting it, if they do adopt it, that would get the ball moving?
Yes. This is where New York needs to lead. And I do think New York City taking this step would open up the door of possibility. That's why so many people want to keep it closed. Incidentally, what is the reading room as your background? That's pretty cool.
The map room in the New York City Public Library.
Oh, wow, that's beautiful.
That is.
Yeah, but I do think that's one of the opportunities. But because of the various mechanisms, I mean, one of the things the state is considering is moving all local elections to even years. I think that's a great reform as well. That would also save money and increase turnout. That's what I call a win-win. But yes, I think that getting open primaries in New York City will help much of the rest of the state reconsider.
Totally. And also, think about this, if we move in New York City to even year elections and enact some form of open primaries, then voters are going to have the experience of not being able to vote in state primaries, but being able to vote in city primaries. And that's going to create pressure on its own. So I think that, yes, what we can do in New York City can have a real impact. Let's go to Mike Ang in Oregon, who has a policy question. Go ahead, Mike.
Hey, hi, John. I am wondering strategically why you don't push for beyond just open primaries for partisan primaries and go with full open nonpartisan primaries that would allow all voters. I mean, really focusing on voters' rights and allowing all voters.
I guess I wasn't clear enough. That is what we're going for. A total open primary.
All candidates on the same ballot.
Candidates. You get to put your party affiliation by your name, but an open primary where everyone runs for mayor.
Cool.
Yeah.
That's
the
fantastic.
Semi-open option, I actually don't think is a sufficient fix.
Yeah. Thank you.
Let's go to Kathy Stewart, who has a question about the national impact of New York. Go ahead, Kathy.
Hi.
Hey, Kathy.
Great conversation. And I swear I did not think that we would be back with this opportunity. And I want to underscore the experience that independent voters are having as we show up by the dozens, the handfuls, submit testimony, and testify in front of the commission of being heard. It's a very unusual experience to have this breakthrough where a commission appointed by a mayor actually listens to voters and feels a sense of urgency. And I think you put it very well, John, of the unique circumstances that we have in the city this year. I wanted to ask you both to say more about how you read what kind of impact this could have for the reform movement nationally if we were able to get on the ballot and then able to pass a form of open primaries. Like, how do you see that? And
thank you, Kathy. I appreciate that. And I know where it's coming from. Look, I do think that New York has disproportionate throw weight culturally, not just because it's America's largest city, but because so many people in journalism and media and, finance and other folks live in and around New York. So I think it would take this from being abstract. I think the fact that New York has close partisan primaries doesn't even occur to people, right, as being an outlier. And so I think if this change were to take place, combined with ranked choice voting, I think it would have so much better results that it would actually carry ripples throughout the country. It would remind people that these things are within our power. Ranked choice voting is a really important, but comparatively small reform that right now only impacts the Democratic primary. If you have an open primary with ranked choice voting, you will get so much better results, and I think people will be really engaged, and I think that will send forth ripples across the country. So I would encourage national activists to really look at New York's races right now, because I do think they will help unlock the door to broader support.
Yeah, I think also, Kathy, just to mirror what John is saying, is that something that I think is still the case is that independent voters have the numbers, but don't have the narrative. Like, we can talk 45%, the fastest growing. I mean, John said it in that video clip. Independents are the only segment of the electorate that's growing in New York City. But those are dry statistics. They don't impact. People don't care about them. And I think that one of the things about opening up the system in New York City, one of the most partisan towns in America, is yeah, okay. We agree to disagree.
I mean, I would.
It's a tough town.
Yeah, but look, I think one of the sorry, finish your point, and then I'll.
No. Okay, so I think that independents, we have to take more responsibility for changing the political culture, and we can't just say, "Oh, we got open primaries, great, mission accomplished." That's just opening the door. Then people have to walk through the door. And they have to bring new voices and new conversations and new candidacies and new ways of doing business. And I think if we can do that in New York, we can do that anywhere.
Yeah, no, I 100% agree with that. I would just say that a lot of stereotypes about cities, and I do believe urban-rural divides say as much about our underlying partisan divides as anything. But look, New York had 20 years of Republican and independent mayors under Rudy and Bloomberg. 20.
Right.
I mean, San Francisco tossed out its school board and its DA when they were seen as being too far activist left. So I think just a lot of the stereotypes about sometimes big cities, even the most stereotypically liberal big cities, actually break down on closer inspection. It is in currently, because the Republican Party's moved so far right, the city has become more partisan. That is absolutely true. But I think there is sometimes an idea that these cities are incredibly far, some stereotype of far left that doesn't bear reality. There's no like pro-crime constituency or whatever the fantasia that's been cooked up on Fox News about big cities. Not that that's what you're referring to,
John. Right. No, that's very, very accurate. All right, we've got just a few more minutes here. John has a hard stop. I want to go to John German, who has a question. Go ahead, John.
My question is relevant only for places that have closed primaries, which is the case in New York where I am. And the reason I put that in the chat is that there was one guy who said essentially that if you allow people who are not members of my party to vote in my party's primary, they could do sabotage of my party, and cited some examples. And I thought that was a point that needed to be refuted if it was going to be dealt with. But I'm thrilled to hear that New York, I might actually be able to vote in a primary. I went to my election place during one primary where I wanted to vote in the other party's primary. And they properly said you can't do that.
Yep.
So if we're going to have primaries where I can vote, I'll be there every time. I'm only registered in the party because when I registered to vote many years ago, I registered for a party, but it's meaningless. I don't pay any attention to it. I haven't done it my whole life. It doesn't mean a thing. I'm essentially an independent, not registered as an independent. Anyway, thank you for what you're doing. This is terrific.
Yeah,
glad to hear of it. Thank you.
Thank you, John German. So yeah, look, I would say that first of all, you're not alone, and that always bothered me, right? The idea that if you want to participate in the process, join the party, right? I was like, there are countries where you have to do that. America hasn't been one of them traditionally. But I do hear politicians saying, well, gosh, what if they're dirty tricks efforts to sort of mess with our primary? That's an argument against semi-open primaries, right? I think most people are more good faith and less negatively strategic than that. But if that's your concern, then the broader open primaries should alleviate that, particularly with ranked choice voting.
All right, we're going to close it out with one last question from Louise Short. Go ahead, Louise. Oh, you're on mute, Louise.
Yes.
You're muted, Louise.
So I'm sitting in the great state of Oklahoma that just passed legislation to ban citizen petitions or put a significant roadblock. John, I met you with Margaret Kobos in Nichols Hills Country Club a while ago. I know Margaret and her the organization are looking to challenge that in the courts, and I was just curious if you have any insight as to what are the options that we can actually do to get that legislation undone.
There are questions for John Opdycke, right?
Yes.
Yeah, I think the challenge is that I believe Oklahoma is in the 10th Circuit. If it was in the 9th Circuit, there's already precedent that what they've done in Oklahoma to restrict and add all these onerous petition requirements of distribution, it would get thrown out. But Oklahoma's not in the 9th Circuit. It's in the 10th, where there's been very little litigation on that question. So it's kind of an open question right now. I think it's great that Margaret is challenging it in court. It's outrageous that what they've done, and hopefully they'll be able to win, but there's not a lot of precedent to go on.
Yeah. Well, and it speaks to the urban versus rural that you were talking about, because it was legislation that was brought to the legislature through Durant, which is obviously a smaller town than Oklahoma City and Tulsa. So
yeah.
No, I was just curious if.
No, we're going to support you guys every step of the way, because it's pretty outrageous what they're trying to do to kill that effort in Oklahoma. That's all our time. Thank you, everyone, for joining us. John Avlon, thank you so much. Good luck with next steps. I'll see you in New York soon as we get this over the finish line. Thank you, everybody. Have a great day.
Take care.
Thanks.